Hey everybody, waitingfornextyear.com podcast. Jeff Nauman is on the line. We missed last week because I was drunk at a pig roast.
Yeah, I sent you a message and was like really apologetic and like, man, I'm just really sorry. I'm having a rough night getting kids in bed, getting lunches packed, and have a bunch of stuff going on. Can we just not do it this week? And you're like, I'm drunk at a pig roast. Woo!
The woo was implied.
And I was so bummed that I reached out to you first and didn't let you just be the bad guy because your excuse was way better, and I should just let you be the bad guy there.
So I'm part of a local charitable organization that parties pretty hard every now and again, and this pig roast was happening at like a park pavilion that is at the end of my street. So not only was I drunk at a pig roast, I rode my bike there and drunkenly rode my bike home.
Ooh,
with a light.
That's pretty good.
Light. It was fun. But this is what happens when you live in the country.
I feel like that would be a much better selling point to get people involved in charity than just like feeling good about yourself and stuff. Like drunken pig roast is pretty good marketing.
Well, it's everything that I've been telling people. You know, it's not about either or. It's yes and. Feel good about yourself and party with a pig roast.
And more importantly.
Yeah, so it was a good time, and I totally forgot about podcasting, and you know, you embarrassed yourself by backing out first, and then
yeah, it really did not work out well for me in any way. I didn't get to be drunk at a pig roast, and I was the bad guy. It just really was a poor choice by me.
And you were a bad guy not for any fun reason whatsoever.
Right, exactly. I was just like literally packing lunches and like doing homework and getting kid stuff ready.
So we are just hours before the Indians play their first playoff game of 2018, and it's hard to really even it's hard to talk about this team. It's been hard to talk about them all regular season because it's been kind of a sleepwalk, a cakewalk, whatever kind of walk to the playoffs. And now on the eve of the playoffs, it's like, are we really going to sit here and try and predict Kluber and break down matchups and wonder if one of the best Indians lineups in the history of the team in our lifetimes is going to like hit?
Yeah, it's incredible that, all right, we've had, Kluber has been Cy Young level. Bauer put up a Cy Young level season. We've had Jose Ramirez most of the season was an MVP candidate, and we had Frankie Lindor as one of the most exciting players in baseball. Like, this should have been one of the most exciting teams we've ever seen, and probably will ever see, 90s notwithstanding. And it felt very much like the Cavs season, where as fun as the team is, as much as you tell yourself you need to appreciate it, the road to get there was just so easy that it was hard to care about any individual game, and therefore you just never felt like you had to tune in. And so now the playoffs are here, and you're trying to ratchet that feeling up. And I know that as soon as that game starts and the first pitch goes, I'll be there. But right now, it's like I'm trying to stretch out those muscles a little bit.
I don't even have the anticipation butterflies yet. Maybe sometime by tomorrow, maybe a half hour before first pitch. But I mean, all the storylines have even been told already. We've long since given up the idea that no matter how bad of an idea it might have been to sign Michael Brantley, it worked. It worked in the Indians' favor. And so we've already eaten all the crow and come to grips with that. There's nothing pending. There's nothing pending for us to explore, discuss, solve on the way to the playoffs.
Right. We're familiar with the team, and it's also a lot like last year, except last year I set us up for this year, and that a lot of guys have just been hurt, and we don't really know what to expect from them coming up. Like, can Trevor Bauer contribute at the level that we need, and what Josh Donaldson are we getting? Those are huge question marks and will dictate, how far we go, but they're not really fun to talk about because we just don't know. Like, we're just fans on a couch, and we have no idea what is going on with that. And so it's a hard team to break down because pretty much all of their questions are just things that are unknown. It's not matchup heavy. It's not this roster has these strengths. It's just a lot of unknowns.
So obviously they're playing the defending champs in the opening round, and they have home field advantage and they're favored. But Do you feel like the Indians are wild underdogs to the degree that like Vegas and commentators seem to be talking about them?
No, not at all. The way I've described it is I feel like they could beat anybody in a series. It's just hard to see them winning multiple series, if that makes sense. They have the talent level that any singular matchup seems like it should be a toss-up just based on the just total amount of talent, the pitching, the bullpen, the lineup, everything is there. But the inconsistencies of this team make it hard to say from series to series you can expect that to keep going because it's just been so up and down. So could they beat Houston? Yeah. I mean, we match up against anybody when our guys are going at full strength. It's just we don't know what strength they're at.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? We'll leave it to Tom Valentino and the Nail in the Coffin podcast. They had Joel Hammond on, so they can break it all down. It's gonna be at the
Are you
end.
trying to say that Joel Hammond knows more about the Indians than me?
No, I'm just saying that's gonna be tacked onto the end of this episode because the Nail is like a brother sister podcast for Waiting for Next Year. We post it on the website. And every now and again, we like to grab one of their episodes and throw it on our feed so that you guys can hear how awesome it is, so that you can go look up the Nail podcast and subscribe to it for yourselves so you hear every episode. And this is one of those episodes. I'm tacking the Nail on at the end. Listen to it, enjoy it. And yeah, they're going to have a different Indians perspective than you and I will, and we will probably jump to other topics now.
And I just want to point out that The Nail is such a great podcast name.
It really is. I love this is so like podcast geeky, but I like the production, like the opening sounds and the nail in the coffin and all. I just love the whole thing. And they are singularly focused. They are uber consistent. They are all the things in a podcaster that I have not been in the last few years. And the keys to success, they are following them and they are doing them. So it's one of the best general Cleveland sports podcasts, plus a little bit of Ohio State. They get good guests even when they don't have guests. It's just really good sports talk. So you should subscribe to The Nail in the Coffin, the Nail podcast. All right, so I'll drag you into the Browns at the end, but did you watch the Cavaliers preseason game?
I did, and I have to admit, I was so pumped for it. I don't know why.
It was really fun.
So excited for this team and like just this season, and it was so much fun. It's so funny how like removing that cloud of expectations and everything should have been awful. Like removing LeBron should make this miserable, and I'm sure we'll reach a point in the season when it is. But it was just really fun to watch to be an underdog and to go in and just whip on Boston for a night. And it just felt so good and so fun.
Well, it's like previous years, the Cavaliers with LeBron are like a film that is nominated for Best Picture, and you're looking at it with a critical eye to see if it's worthy of winning the ultimate prize, that Best Picture Oscar. And this year's Cavaliers team is like a Judd Apatow film. It's like, is this fun? It's supposed to be fun. It could be fun. All it has to do is give us 3 or 4 laughs and make us forget about our problems for a little bit. And that's kind of, I know that's an oversimplification, but that's kind of the way I look at this year's Cavaliers. And with that expectation level, I really think I can enjoy it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it sounds dumb, but by kind of re-signing Love and bringing a lot of the veterans back, they put a ceiling on this team, but it made it right. I mean, they put a ceiling on. We're not trying to compete for a title or anything, and a lot would have to go right. But it also adds an element that is more fun than just bottoming out and watching the kids. Because bottoming out, tanking, getting a bunch of young players is super fun, and like we've tried that. But leaving like a baseline of watchable players just makes everything so much easier. Like, I don't know that I love Rodney Hood or anything, but he looked pretty good and he made that game very watchable. And like Kevin Love was awesome. And it just leaves a baseline of watching the kids within that context is so much easier than watching the kids just flail out on their own.
So I was listening to Brian Windhurst on the Hoop Collective podcast, which I didn't realize how much I missed that podcast until it came back. And even though the Cavaliers are not a hot topic there, they did discuss the Cavaliers a little bit, just because in the lens of LeBron and Kyle Korver being left over, and they were talking about Kyle Korver, and it was almost an aside that they were saying that Kyle Korver was in purgatory in Atlanta, and then he gets the lifeline to go play with LeBron and the Cavaliers, and now LeBron leaves, and it's basically Atlanta all over again. And I don't know that I think it's Atlanta, but I guess they're kind of in that middle class or lower middle class of playoff contenders.
Yeah, and it's not going to be as much fun for him as competing in the playoffs and all that, but he'll have a bigger role, and he seems to really enjoy teaching. Like, he seems like one of those guys who's probably going to be a coach after. You always hear him staying after. I mean, he was helping LeBron with his free throws last year, and he clearly helped Jetty some on his shot, because Jetty's shot looks exactly like his, coming off of screens and stuff. So he seems to relish that a little bit. So I think he's going to enjoy that.
Yeah, he certainly does seem to like teaching. And like, remember when Mike Miller had the shooting academies and stuff when he was still here? I could totally see Kyle Korver being like one of these shooting specialists who help draft picks, almost like LaCharles Bentley does for offensive linemen. And that is his calling, because nobody has a more consistent looking shot, maybe in the history of the NBA, than Kyle Korver.
Right, and he can do that for half a season and still possibly get traded and go to a contender. And he talked about retiring after this season. He could retire after this season, or retiring after last season. He could go to a contender, see what he can do, and retire after this season. That'd be probably a pretty fun year for him, right? He spend half of it in a place that he's been for a little bit, so he's comfortable, can teach some kids, go off, try to win a ring one last time, and then sail off into the sunset. So I don't think it's a terrible situation for him.
So
I'll tell you my gripe with Cavaliers coverage right now is that I understand how big of a story it is that LeBron left, but it feels like everyone outside of the local perspective who writes about the Cavs just uses that as a crutch to not actually have to talk about the Cavs. Like, everything is just, well, how do they fill LeBron's minutes? Well, the gaping hole left by LeBron. Well, this team is clearly not going to be what they were with LeBron. And, like, as a fan, yeah, I don't think there was a lack of coverage that LeBron went to the Lakers. Like, I don't think anybody missed that. And I think we can move on from it and, like, actually talk about the team in a little bit. And I feel like that's the thing I'm already a little bit annoyed at, is everything I try to read where it's just like, okay, I'm a Cavaliers fan, I'm an NBA fan, LeBron left, that's fine, whatever. I just want to enjoy my team, and I feel like the only way that people can discuss the Cavs right now is about the absence of LeBron, and I just kind of want to move on. Like, just talk about my team. Just know something about my team. You know something about every other team.
See, and I love it because it exposes these people. It's not good coverage. You're right. You're 100% right. It's not good coverage. It's lazy. But it's not really written for you. It's not for us. It's kind of for other people who would be like, why? How could you possibly talk about the Cavaliers without the gaping hole that LeBron left? And so there's a lot of coverage, especially this time of year, is weirdly CYA, even though there's like no reason for it. It's like everybody's got to check the box the appropriate way. I see it in preseason Browns coverage and preseason Indians coverage, and there's always basically two talking points, and when LeBron's involved, there's only one. And we'll see if it wears off, but it actually creates an opportunity for us to talk about something other than LeBron. And I plan on doing that on this podcast. Like, we can occasionally, if we do talk about LeBron, it's going to be what a disaster I think the Lakers roster is, and it's going to be a separate conversation from the Cavaliers. Because, like, really, what are we going to talk about? Jetty and Rodney Hood? I was having a lot of fun on Twitter when I said, LeBron has peaked and Jetty's the obvious choice. You should choose Jetty because he's got additional upside. Like, I think it's funny to make those jokes and stuff, but in any serious way, we're going to spend the season talking about the Cavaliers on a week-to-week basis without talking about LeBron.
Right, and you don't, like I said, you don't need to. Like I think we all
We might be the only
understand.
ones.
Yes, and like we all understand that LeBron's gone, and like yes, that sucks, but like it's not even the first time it's happened. You know what I mean? It's not even like a new thing. Like we've done this, so. But yeah, it's not like we have some crazy interesting team to fall back on to talk about either. But it just is one of those things where after a while, it's like okay, like in the power rankings where you're writing 3 sentences about my team. Just, can you include something else? Like you're not even asking for much. You only have to know one thing, and you can write it. And it always ends up just being, well, LeBron's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do Browns game previews where I would take all the superficial information I could find about the opposing team and I'd put it together and put it into a game preview. And if you were like a Bengals fan happening upon my Browns Bengals game preview, you'd be like, this is the dumbest Bengals stuff I've ever seen. It's the most superficial, stupid, and that's everything we getting nationally, other than Windhurst on the podcast. I think is I think is superficial and worthless. So I look
And
forward to filling the vacuum. I fear for our beat a little bit because Jason Lloyd is off of it and McMenamin is gone, and I don't know. It's going to be a stark reality for all of us that there are so fewer and some of the bigger names have left.
yeah, it's kind of crazy that if you don't want to pay for content at this point, you have to your sole real Cavs beat coverage is Chris Fedor, right?
Yeah, I don't think 92.3 or 850 technically even have a beat reporter for the Cavs.
And forgive me for this, but I assume the Akron Beacon Journal is still covering them. Is Marla Ridenour? I thought she retired, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, she might still be around, or the ABJ might have somebody. But I was following Varden and realized that my athletics subscription ran out, and I was like, oh, like if I don't want to pay for Cavs content, Fedor's the only game in town.
Well, and a lot of people who signed up for the Athletics signed up for Jason Lloyd's final thoughts. So I'm not saying that they won't be able to do it, but it's going to be a daunting task to try and figure out what the value proposition is on a going forward basis, just because it's different. It's at least somewhat different.
Right. The Cavs are worse, so our interest in the Cavs is going to go down slightly, and then if we're also losing the final thoughts portion of that, the voice that wrote that we all signed up for.
But he's now doing final thoughts on the Browns, so it's probably actually a better business move for the Athletic.
True.
Because the Browns, even though they're an utter disaster, are just constantly drawing clicks and God knows how much traffic.
They're incredible. The city's love for the Browns is just one of the most amazing things.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
And it's like really impressive. Like I feel like sometimes it's used in a negative, and I know that I'm a big Indians attendance fighter, but like I never mean that as a negative thing. Like it's truly incredible that the fans can get this much support for a team that's been bad for so long and just get this excited about it every year, and it's awesome.
Well, and now that there might actually be a reason, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, I'm already enjoying watching the meltdowns of, was it Baker's fault versus was it the receiver's fault, and there's a shiny new object at quarterback and everybody's very, very much rushing to protect it, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Well, this is so I know you keep up with the Browns even though it's not like your top thing. So let's transition to the Browns. This is something that I've talked about with Ben Axelrod. I talk about with anybody who will listen. Far be it for me to tell Browns fans they need to be patient, but yelling and screaming at the entire coaching staff, including brand new offensive coordinator, that the guy who couldn't block and defend for punts and gave up a sack because he didn't know how to pass block, Nick Chubb, goes bonkers for 3 runs in game 4 And it's like a catastrophic mistake that he hasn't even been getting 20 carries a game for the first 4 games of his entire career.
Yeah, what is going on? Like, why? Uh-oh, I gotta go. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My daughter's throwing up all over. I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
And that's where we leave this edition of the waitingfornextyear.com podcast. Please check out The Nail in the Coffin. Please subscribe to it. Look it up on iTunes. Subscribe to The Nail with Tom Valentino and Travis Yulee. It's really good. I love the podcast. That's it. We'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.
The Nail in the Coffin!
It's an MLB postseason edition of The Nail. I'm Tom Valentino. Trav is away on business, but I am joined by Joel Hammond. Joel, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the last time we talked on here, you were running social media for the Indians. You've since taken an agency job and joined the rest of us in the 9-to-5 world. Was it weird for you this season watching as a fan again? Or maybe the better question, can you even go back to just watching as a fan after spending 5 years working for the team?
It was weird. But it was fun. You know, I didn't have to hang on every pitch. You know, I didn't have to worry about, the worst part of losing was knowing what you have to face when you work in the social space. It's harder to get away from some of the negativity that surrounds, any loss. And so it was hard to get away from that. But this year it's been a little weird, not being around, not being around the guys, not being around the team. But it's been fun too, to not have to, worry about how that affects my job, my role, and just be able to kind of have fun with it.
All right. So your time there overlapped with all 3 of the postseason appearances for the Indians in this current era. The wild card game in 2013, and then obviously the past 2 years. How did your job change once the playoffs started versus the day-to-day grind of the regular season? What's it like at this time of the year?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it was 13 was a little bit different back then. Social was still a little, I mean, it's crazy to think, but social was still emerging at that point. So my role back then was a little bit different. It was more media focused. And I'll tell you, we're recording this as the AL wildcard game is on, and the wildcard game is not it's not fun for anybody. I mean, especially in 13, I think Terry, you heard Terry talk about a number of times where, it's hard to lose that way because the season just sort of comes to a stop. In 16, it was different because we had that great run, and you knew the season was going to be over after Game 7 of the World Series. In 13, it was like, we're gearing up for a fun run. We had just won 10 in a row, and then the season just sort of ends 9 innings later. And it's tough for Tom is, I was talking to some ballpark operations people this week at Progressive Field, and that's tough for them, especially so think if the Indians get swept, God forbid they get swept by the Astros this year. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing the ballpark for the postseason. In 13, they did all that work, our operations crew, they did all that work for one game. This year, theoretically, they could do it for one game. Last year, of course, there was 3 games, but it was still too early for their liking. So, it's a whole new ball game for those folks, for the communication staff. The postseason's crazy. There's more media. There's more preparation. There's more, there's more eyeballs on your work. So you want it, it's hard to frame it that way, but you want your work to sing a little bit more in the postseason. Just like the guys on the field do. You want your work to sing a little bit too. So there's more preparation, more discussion, more planning, more time spending executing things. So. It's a fun time, but it's certainly more nerve-wracking, and it's just a nervous time in general.
Yeah, you mentioned ballpark ops. That kind of got me to thinking. Out in Oakland, the Browns were playing this past weekend, and they still had the infield dirt there, and they had to keep that place, ready to host more baseball, and they might not actually have any more games. Like, as we record right now, the A's are, I think, down 2-0. If they don't make a comeback here, the baseball season's over. So, I guess that's kind of an extra layer of complexity for them to be dealing with out there in the Bay Area. But all right, so back as in civilian life, I guess we'll call it. Have you felt kind of liberated? I haven't gotten the sense following you on Twitter that you ever had anything remotely close to an axe to grind. But you're also no longer a representative of the team, and you could just tweet with the rest of us.
Yeah, it's no axe to grind. I was treated great when I was there. I mean, but at the same time, you're able to, frankly, I felt limited when I was with the Indians. I mean, you are a representative, and this took me a little while to learn, Tom. I came from Cranes, where my job was to sort of be a little bit more, whatever you want to say, stir the pot a little bit, and be a journalist. The job is to form opinions and be part of the conversation. Where with the Indians, you're now representing a $1 billion brand, and you need to make sure you're doing the right thing in all parts of your life, including social media. So, I was certainly mindful of that when I would tweet, and had conversations internally about that from time to time. Early in my career, later on, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on it. But Tom, my role was going on TV and radio and speaking, representing the Indians at speaking engagements, and people get to know who you are, so you need to portray that on your social media channels. So, that was one thing that was tough for me, where I'm pretty opinionated, and whether it's baseball, whether it's politics, whether it's whatever, you need to mind your P's and Q's when you're representing an organization like that. Now, I'm able to speak a little bit more freely, and I of course am an Indians fan and watch the games and have my opinions about the team, and it's a little easier to sort of participate in the conversation now with fellow Indians fans. So that's kind of what I like about it. Being able to talk more openly about what I feel like is going on with the team, and participate more in the conversation with Indians fans. That's something that I've enjoyed being able to do now that I've switched roles.
Well, the good news is we've got some more baseball to talk about here. Division series for the Indians going to be starting on Friday in Houston, playing the Astros. Looking like we're going to see lots of day baseball in this series, which we have not really had a whole lot of in the postseason the last couple of years. But this is kind of what happens when you're not playing the Yankees or the Red Sox in the first round. Personally, I can't say that I'm going to complain too loudly. I've now got a work from home job, so at a TV in my office, I'll be keeping an eye on things on Friday afternoon. But
I can tell you, Tom, from a staff perspective, when those came out. When those game times came out, it is, you hope for those day games. I know it's inconvenient for fans, but when you're working those long hours, we'd have media at the ballpark every morning at Progressive Field for postseason games, so it'd be like a 3 a.m. arrival for me. So when you're talking, World Series games or ALs, against the Yankees, those are games that you're at the ballpark at 3 a.m. and you're leaving it at midnight, So just from a purely selfish staff standpoint, when those game times came out, you love to see afternoon games. There's no doubt about it.
Well, we're going to get that game one, 2 in the afternoon, I think on Friday, and then 4:30 Saturday. Just from your perspective, what storylines have kind of grabbed you, and what are you interested in the most heading into this series?
The absolute key is, I've tweeted about this a few times throughout this season. I haven't, this is not breaking news, but I don't think Andrew Miller is right still. So if they can't trust Andrew Miller and Cody Allen, I think they're in trouble. So I'll be interested to see how Terry uses those guys, when he uses them. Do you save Brad Hand for the 8th and 9th, or if there's a big spot in the 7th with, some big guys up, do you bring Hand in? The Astros are all, they're heavily right-handed leaning. So where does Brad Hand fit? In 2016, Andrew Miller doesn't matter who he was facing, he was in there. Does Brad Hand, is he in there for 2 innings against the right-handers too? It's with Cody Allen struggling, is your right-handed specialist now gone? So that's the most important thing to me. Can you trust your bullpen? Can you trust those guys that if in the 5th inning Corey Kluber gets into trouble, can you bring those guys in and lean on them for 4 innings? I don't know, Tom. I'm frankly a little frightened about that. So the best part you can hope for is that their offense sings and performs well and beats up some of these pitchers and gets them leads and you have some wiggle room. But it's going to be a tough series, there's no doubt about it.
Just the way pitching staffs get handled in the postseason in general fascinates me. And the Indians have, I think, been really creative over the last couple of years, almost out of necessity, really, 2 years ago with some of the injuries to the starters. And then, last year, it was something that was talked about quite a bit after that series ended, that the Indians started Trevor Bauer in game 1 and Kluber in game 2. We only saw Carlos Carrasco once in game 3. Whereas this year, you're going to see Corey Kluber in game 1, Carrasco game 2, Clevenger in game 3, and then, we'll see how it goes from there. But to maybe kind of address some of those concerns that you've got about the traditional bullpen guys, do you think we're going to see a lot of Trevor Bauer or Shane Bieber coming out of the pen in the first couple games?
Yeah, I do. I think maybe that's your maybe that's your safety net. If Klubs gets in trouble in game 1, is Bauer the first guy out of the pen? That way, if Bauer can come in and sort of quiet the noise and stifle the Astros, maybe then you get 2 or 3 more innings until you have to go to those guys. I think it's a great point. And, I think I had a conversation earlier this week on Twitter about where would you rank the Indians going into the postseason? And, I think they're at the bottom of the AL pile before the postseason starts because of those bullpen issues. But if they can get those swing innings from Bauer and Bieber, that'll be huge. And Tom, I was looking at some statistics to prepare for this, and the Astros. The one advantage the Indians have is the Astros being a right-handed, heavy hitting lineup. They struggle against right-handed pitching. I think they were 20th in batting average against right-handed pitching this year in the big leagues. As we've talked about, and as the Indians have a ton of right-handed pitching, and if they can keep those guys at bay long enough, then I think they've got a good chance. You asked about most important things. So to me, it's bullpen, but maybe before you even get to the bullpen, can the Indians offense, can Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor avoid what happened last year and snap out of whatever plagued them the last month of the year? That might be even before you get to the bullpen, because if you can't score, your bullpen is not going to matter much. So I'm hoping those guys can snap out of whatever's going on with them. Maybe they just got bored. I mean, Tom, I think we discussed this maybe even, but if you're at a job and you do the same thing over and over again, you do the same mundane tasks day after day after day, but there's a carrot there's a light at the end of the tunnel, like you get bored. I'm sure these guys were bored as hell this season, So maybe that's it. Maybe the stage will be what they need to snap out of whatever has been going on.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of the thing. I mean, a Major League Baseball season, just by its nature, being 162 games is just a grind, no matter what the standings look like. And for the Indians, I mean, they were in a position where, let's be honest, barring something catastrophic, they knew they were going to be playing in October when they took the field on opening day. Head and shoulders better than the rest of the Central, and that was how it played out. So, it wasn't like they really had to face any sort of real stakes at all in the past 6 months. And I kind of wonder if that contributes to it. I mean, you start wearing down after you play 140, 150 games. And when you're playing all those games and, you don't really have a whole lot attached to them because you're just killing time until the first week of October rolls around, that's got to kind of drain you a little bit, I would think.
Yeah, I think you asked me earlier about, you missed the job. And I mean, this year, to be honest, would have been a slog. I can't imagine, for the staff, like you play the same bad 4 teams over and over again. Like you look at the schedule and, I'm coming home from work and oh, who do the Indians play tonight? Oh God, they play the Royals again. Jeez, oh man, I don't need to. It's. I can't imagine how the players felt. Like as fans, it was like, God, can we please fast forward to October? So I'm sure that these guys got bored, and I don't think you can take the regular season and say, oh, they're not as good as the other AL teams just because they didn't win as many games. They didn't, they only won as many games as they did because of the schedule. Well, first of all, they were bored. I had no doubt that they were sick of seeing the same bad teams over and over again, and I think that certainly played a role. So I'm hoping that's the case. It's just a hypothesis, and but I'm hoping that's the case, and kind of the stage and the bright lights and the adrenaline kind of snapped those guys out of whatever it is that they were going through.
I'm going to have a confession here. I know it benefited them, but as a fan, I was sick of seeing those same four teams all over again. I like seeing them play good teams, even if the results, it doesn't benefit you in the standings as much. I could only watch games against the Royals and the Tigers and, everybody else in the Central so many times. So Major League Baseball's imbalanced schedule, I don't know. That's probably a conversation for another day, but I mean, it is what it is.
It was brutal. Like I said, when you work for a club, you're there all day, you're there all day, every day. You're away from your family. The payoff is at the end when you win the division. But like for me this year, like if I was still there, it would have been tough for me to like, why am I, this is pointless. I was sure, like I said, this had to have crept into the players' minds at some point. Like if I'm a staff member sitting there at the ballpark from 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. every single day this summer, like the Indians won the division on April 1st, like this is so pointless. Can I go home? Can I spend time with my family? Can we fast forward to October 1st? Can we just get away from these same bad four teams? And I have no doubt that, everyone within the organization had some measure of that reaction and sort of fatigue this year.
All right, so getting back to the guys on the field here, Terry Francona put out 24 of the 25-man roster for the Division Series round. It looks like it's coming down to Eric Gonzalez versus Rajai Davis for that 25th spot. I thought that was kind of strange to make that public, that you've got 24 spots settled and you've got two guys that you're considering. Hey, it's cool he's transparent about the whole thing, but that kind of surprised me. Anything roster wise with the way they've got this set up for this round that surprises you at all?
Not really. I wish that Leonys Martin was healthy, so there wouldn't have to be a decision of Eric Gonzalez versus Rajai Davis. I don't think either of those players merits a spot on the postseason roster, but that's where they're at. I guess a very minor surprise was Josh Tomlin not being on the roster just because of his stature and his reputation and his his sort of standing with his fellow players, but you just couldn't trust him in the postseason, and so just a little surprised, just based on his, like I said, his reputation, his tenure, and that sort of thing, but not from a performance standpoint. Not that he deserved a spot. Tyler Olson, Neil Ramirez were the two guys that kind of were on the bubble from a bullpen standpoint. Again, against the Astros, like, do you need four lefties in the pen? Probably not. So, Miller, Hand, and Oliver Perez are your lefties. And, does Oliver Perez see much time? Probably, he's going to face his one batter and out. So, we talked about the bullpen earlier. I didn't mention Adam Simber, who had a tough year once the trade was completed, but he'll be huge against the Astros. Like, can he come in and get a couple righties in a row out? I don't know. So, from a roster construction standpoint, I just wish, I know Leonys Martin had a pretty serious health issue. I'm glad it seems like he's doing better and he'll be a key part of the 2019 team, but his absence certainly was felt, and will be, and I think will be in the postseason.
Yeah, that was scary. It was such a unusual situation, and it just happened. It just felt like it came up so abruptly. He had barely been with the club for about 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden,
crazy timing.
That came down, and I'll echo what you said. Hopefully, he's getting better and things are trending in the right direction. Several guys on this roster, Tomlin being one of them that you mentioned, Andrew Miller, Brantley, Cody Allen. There are several guys on this team who have been here for either all or most of this run, and a lot of them may or may not be here next year. The Indians, with or without them, I think just based on where the rest of the teams in the Central are, I think the Indians will probably still be favored to win the division again. But I don't know. It kind of at times feels like there maybe is like a last hurrah with this group a little bit. Is that a real thing within the organization, or do you think that's something that gets overblown by those of us sitting here at our office podcasting on a Wednesday night?
No, I think the players feel that. These guys have been around for a long time, and like you said, there are a lot of guys who've been around a long time that probably won't be with the team anymore. So Cody Allen, Michael Brantley, Jason Kipnis could be traded. Should be traded. Josh Tomlin. I'm trying to think. I don't have the balance sheet in front of me, but I think the players feel that for sure. That might add a little bit more motivation for them to perform this year and try to make one last run at it. But I mean, look, if you need that to motivate you at this time of the year, then you're probably not, right for this situation. I mean, there's lots of different motivation this time of the year. I mean, these guys are playing for contracts, right? So Michael Brantley had a pretty darn good year. A big postseason could get him a better deal next year. I don't know where that's going to be. I don't know if he gives the Indians a little bit of a discount because they stuck with him this year, picked up his option. But, let's face it, Cody Allen hasn't had a very good year. So he could be pitching for his contract, and he could be pitching for millions of dollars if he proves himself to be able to perform in October. Same with Andrew Miller. Like what could Andrew Miller realistically expect from the market after his season this year and his season last year? Really, he's not invincible anymore. So he's got to, this is about market value. This is about winning World Series. And Kipnis, who knows where his head's at, but if you need that as motivation this time of the year, I just think your head's in the wrong place. I think they feel it, and I think there's some sentimentality there, but I don't think that's really a driving factor for some of those guys that we talked about.
For those guys that you mentioned there, I'm not even sure it's so much a sense of motivation as it's just an added element of pressure. Josh Donaldson, another one. He hasn't really been here that long and doesn't necessarily fit into that category with the other guys. But I mean, he's another one. He's going to have a real interesting contract situation this winter. And I mean, he was brought in by the Indians specifically for this week and hopefully a few more here this month. So
yeah, he's 34 and has missed a bunch of time this year and last year and hasn't been himself for a couple of years. So he's another one that, I mean, yeah, you probably don't need too much more motivation than, hey, look, you've seen it, Tom. Like, what's the market? What's the current Major League Baseball free agent market value a 34-year-old often injured third baseman at? I mean, probably not a whole lot. The market could value a 34-year-old third baseman who proved himself healthy at the end of the year by hitting 5 home runs in the postseason, leading the Indians to the World Series. Like that's a whole different story. So there's lots of motivation for all these guys.
All right. Looking over in the other dugout, what else do I need to know about the Houston Astros?
Oh, geez. I look for weaknesses, and I mean, maybe that one that I mentioned is their weakness, batting against right-handed pitching. And luckily the Indians have a lot of good ones, but their bullpen was tops in the league. Their starters were tops in the league. If I can I've got this right in front of me here, but even with that, average against right-handers, they still were 7th in the league in hitting. They can mash, and they're deep. They're 8th in the league in slugging. So, I mean, they don't have a lot of weaknesses. I think you've got to hope that they get cold, kind of like the Indians did at the wrong time last year for 3 straight games. They didn't hit much and maybe didn't pitch as well as they could have over the last 3 games. And their manager is really good. AJ Hinch is, probably the kind of manager that you want, who has exhibited his ability to think forward and be progressive and give young guys a shot and it's unbelievable what they've been able to do. And not every team can do this. Think about this, Tommy. Everybody's trying to duplicate what the Astros and Cubs have done by completely bottoming out, and you see the pain points going through that. The White Sox and the Reds. I mean, I had this discussion today with a Cubs fan who was obviously not happy after last night. But like, what do you have to look forward to if you're the Reds or the White Sox? They're trying to do what the Astros and the Cubs did, and they're failing at it. I mean, those Cubs and Astros did this on a very truncated timetable, and these teams are years into it and showing no signs of life. So the Astros deserve credit for being able to pull it off, and obviously they're reaping the rewards of it. It's hard to find a weakness with the Astros, no matter how deep you look.
All right, I know they got Verlander. We saw him for years with the Tigers. Give me some other reasons why I should despise the Houston Astros, because I don't have a whole lot of disdain built up for them over the years. This isn't a team that we have much history with here in Cleveland.
I mean, if you're into the whole Trevor Bauer feud, then maybe that's one of them. He, well documented, sort of wondered how Garrett Cole got so good when he went to Houston from Pittsburgh, and whether you like Trevor's ultimate reason or theory on why Cole did. I mean, that certainly adds some intrigue. I don't think Bauer will be well received in Houston. He didn't pitch in Houston the last time or did he? Maybe he ended up getting moved back up and did pitch. I don't think he did, though. I think they sort of moved it around, so he didn't pitch in Houston anyway. There's not a whole lot of unlikable parts of the team. If Roberto Ozuna very controversially was traded from the Jays to the Astros, and after what appeared to be pretty serious domestic abuse allegations. So maybe that's a reason that you don't like him. They've got a few former Indians. Joe Smith is well liked. Tony Sipp is their big lefty reliever. I'm sure you'll see a lot of Tony Sipp versus Michael Brantley, Jason Kipnis, and Yonder Alonso. There's not a whole lot to dislike. I mean, like, how could you not like Carlos Correa and Jose Altuve? I mean, it's an organization that the Indians, frankly, should want to model themselves after. And who knows? Maybe the Indians probably were the Astros before the Astros from like a organizational structure and respect standpoint. The Astros just happen to win a World Series, and the Indians haven't. So there's not a whole lot to dislike, but you don't need a whole lot to do that this time of year, because look, you're trying to win. You're trying to win. So I love the Astros. If they weren't playing the Indians, I'd probably be cheering for them. I certainly was last year against the Dodgers, and they obviously won. There's just not a whole lot to dislike about this team. They're young, they're fun, but you got to find something this week.
Well, I'm sure one way or another, about a week from now, we're going to be good and sick of them. So
yes.
We'll enjoy the era of good feelings here in the meantime. Anything else about this series that you had loaded up and you wanted to dive into, or have we hit all the bases here?
I don't like the Corey Kluber can't pitch in the postseason. I know he had a tough year last year. Who knows? I thought the Indians, frankly, made a mistake last year and earlier in spring training about, like, fans, I feel like, deserve to know what was going on with Corey Kluber last year. Like, was he hurt? Was he not hurt? Did he just have 2 bad starts? Which is fine. Like, if that's the case, cool, no problem. That happens. What are you going to do? But I feel bad for Klubs because he had such a dominant 2016 postseason. He and Andrew Miller basically carried the Indians to Game 7, and unfortunately, that obviously caught up with both of those players in that series. But I want Kluber to succeed, to put that to bed, because my memories of Kluber is the 2016 postseason, not the 2017 postseason. I want him to be able to point to this year and sort of reestablish himself as a kind of a clutch performer. And I think he's got the opportunity to do that. I hope he does that. I just want Lindor and Ramirez to sort of get rid of this. Similarly, get rid of that narrative about themselves. Like, they cost the Indians the series last year because they didn't hit. Well, they're really good players, and Indians fans should be happy that they have them and not taking them for granted. So I hope that they're able to perform in this series and beyond. That way, that sort of narrative goes away about them. When that starts to follow you around, you can talk about Jose's great year and he'll probably be an MVP finalist again. And but if he doesn't do it in the postseason, like that starts to follow you around, like this offseason, before I left, at least, it was, you talked about Jose as an MVP finalist, you talked about Klubs as Cy Young, and a lot of fans didn't want to hear any of that because they didn't perform when it mattered most, which I get. Like, that's cool. I understand. Like, fandom is fandom, and if you don't win a World Series, then you are a failure. I get that totally, and trust me, the organization feels that way too. Like, and those guys, the players do too. But when this starts to happen repeatedly, that starts to follow you around, and I don't want that for any of those players.
That's such a brutal do or die situation. I mean, a baseball season plays out over so many games, and then the way your year is defined, it's going to come down to a week. I mean, everything they've put in for this year, if it goes well, then that just buys you another 7 to 9 days, and hopefully beyond that. But there's no margin for error at this time of the year, I guess.
No.
All right. Well, there was no margin for error here either, and thankfully you delivered in spades. So, Joel, this is awesome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Tom, you got it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Reminder, everybody, you could subscribe to The Nail in the Coffin on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on Stitcher. We're on TuneIn. And if you're listening on the podcast app on your iPhone, scroll down the page with our episodes and hit us with that 5-star review. You could also stream us on waitingfornextyear.com. Thanks again to Joel Hammond for joining me tonight on the show here. Travis should be back next week. I'm sure we're going to have plenty to talk about in this series here. So this is Tom Valentino, and it's been The Nail in the Coffin, and we'll talk to you soon.